is that every brother I've lost was in a moment when we were not getting on.
The whole family did. Nobody really knew how to deal with it all because it's the loss of 3 brothers.
But as I say, we are in a very fortunate position where we can actually do those things that we enjoy doing.
Think of younger days when living for my life.
In front of a camera, on stage, you become a different person that you probably wouldn't be.
In his final years, Robin Gibb would sometimes sit alone, long after midnight, lights off, phone untouched, the house completely silent. Not because no one loved him, but because there was one truth he never said out loud. And once he realized what it was, there was no way to say it anymore. If you care about the real stories behind the music, subscribe to RetroWaves. This channel is built for that. By the time the world began paying close attention to Robin Gibb again, most people believed the story had already found its peace. The Bee Gees were no longer controversial. Their legacy had settled into reverence. The chaos, the feuds, the public fractures, all of that felt like history. Robin appeared calm, measured, thoughtful in interviews. He spoke like someone who had made sense of everything. But peace and resolution are not the same thing. Because while resolution closes doors, peace often just teaches you which ones you're no longer willing to open. And Robin had quietly stopped opening doors. Not because the pain behind them disappeared, but because he no longer believed reopening them would lead anywhere he hadn't already been hurt before. That choice didn't look dramatic. It didn't look tragic. It looked mature. And that's why almost no one noticed what it was doing to him. What almost no one noticed was that Robin hadn't stopped caring. He had stopped pressing. For most of his life, Robin Gibb was emotionally intense in ways people rarely understood correctly. He wasn't loud for the sake of noise. He wasn't confrontational for control. He was confrontational for clarity. Robin needed emotional truth the way other people need stability. Inside the Bee Gees, this made him difficult at times, but it also made him essential. When something felt unresolved, Robin couldn't ignore it. When something felt unfair, he said so. When something hurt, he wanted to know why. And for decades, that friction kept the family emotionally honest, even when it was uncomfortable. Arguments weren't failures. They were proof that people still cared enough to fight. Until one day, they weren't. The real shift didn't happen during a fight. It happened after one, when nothing followed. When Robin and Barry's relationship began to cool, it didn't collapse in public. There were no explosive statements, no dramatic ultimatums, no clear breaking point the press could point to. Instead, something quieter took place. Conversations became shorter. Decisions became final without discussion. Disagreements stopped turning into dialogue. They simply ended. And for someone like Robin, that was deeply unsettling. Because silence isn't neutral to a person who needs emotional resolution. Silence is an answer. And the answer Robin felt he was receiving was that his emotional needs had become inconvenient. Years later, someone close to Robin would say there was a question he never stopped asking himself, but he stopped asking it out loud because he was afraid of the answer. Robin didn't walk away from the family. He didn't distance himself physically. He stayed present, which made everything harder to explain. From the outside, nothing looked broken. He still attended events, still contributed musically, still showed up when it mattered. But internally, Robin began to feel like a guest in emotional spaces that once belonged to him. No one excluded him, but no one leaned toward him either. And that middle ground, being included without being needed, slowly hollowed him out. Robin felt that shift immediately. He just didn't know what to do with it. What hurt most wasn't being pushed away. It was being allowed to drift without anyone noticing. Robin's loneliness did not come from isolation. It came from proximity without connection. He was surrounded by people who loved him, trusted him, respected him. People who assumed that if something were wrong, Robin would say so. But Robin had already learned something painful by then. Speaking honestly didn't always bring closeness. Sometimes it only reinforced distance. So he began choosing silence, not out of resentment, but caution. At first, it felt temporary, a pause, a way to keep the peace. But pauses have a way of becoming patterns. And before Robin realized it, silence had become his default response to emotional discomfort. At one point, someone asked Robin if he was happy. He hesitated, just long enough for the question to linger. Then he smiled softly and changed the subject. Robin still believed deeply in family. That belief never faded, but he also believed that harmony came at a cost. And more often than not, that cost was emotional honesty. He stopped revisiting unresolved moments, stopped naming feelings that complicated conversations, stopped asking questions that didn't come with safe answers. Not because those questions disappeared, but because he no longer wanted to be the one who disrupted the calm. Robin began to feel that his role had shifted, not officially, not intentionally, but emotionally. And once a person senses their emotional role has changed, they rarely ask for it back. What no one realized was that Robin wasn't withdrawing from people. He was withdrawing from expectation, especially his own. This inward turn didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. In conversations that stayed surface level, in memories that went unacknowledged, in silences that lingered a few seconds longer than they used to. Robin noticed every one of them, but he rarely commented, because commenting meant risking something worse than conflict. It meant risking indifference, and that fear, subtle but persistent, reshaped the way Robin moved through his own life. He learned how to be present without being vulnerable, engaged without being exposed, loved but emotionally contained. When Maurice Gibb passed away, the world focused on what the J's had lost. Almost no one noticed what Robin lost. Maurice had always been more than a brother. He was a stabilizing force, a quiet interpreter who understood Robin's emotional shifts without requiring explanation. When Robin grew distant, Maurice noticed. When Robin hesitated, Maurice waited. There was an unspoken understanding between them that didn't need translation. And when Maurice was gone, that understanding vanished with him. For the first time in his life, Robin felt emotionally unanchored. Robin didn't fall apart in public. He adapted, which many people mistook for strength. He spoke gently about Maurice. He honored him with composure. He carried himself with a calm that reassured everyone watching.
But nothing could have prepared me for what I felt for losing losing Maurice was so unexpected, so out of the blue.
But grief didn't empty Robin. It reorganized him. The emotional space Maurice once held was never filled again, and Robin didn't attempt to replace it. Instead, he grew quieter, not withdrawn, not distant, just more careful. After Maurice's death, Robin simplified himself. He spoke less about feelings and more about facts, less about memory and more about legacy, less about what hurt and more about what endured. This wasn't denial, it was containment. Robin had learned over time that emotional honesty didn't always bring closeness. Sometimes it reopened wounds that had already scarred, and he no longer believed reopening those wounds would help anyone. People around him believed he had found peace, and in a way, he had. But peace built on restraint feels different from peace built on release. Robin wasn't depressed in the way people expect grief to look. He didn't collapse. He didn't lash out. He didn't retreat entirely. He became measured. And measured people often look healed, even when they're simply enduring. Robin still loved his family deeply. That never changed. But he no longer believed emotional honesty would bring him closer to them. Not because they wouldn't listen, but because he feared that saying certain things would create distances that could never be repaired. So he chose silence, not as punishment, not as withdrawal, but as protection. In quiet moments, Robin reflected more than he spoke. He thought about the years of intensity, the arguments, the separations, the reunions. He thought about how much of his life had been spent reaching for understanding, reaching for emotional clarity, reaching for reassurance that he still mattered in the same way. And slowly, he realized something that unsettled him. The reaching had stopped, not because he no longer cared, but because he no longer believed the answers were coming. The truth his family never knew wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a secret confession or a final revelation. It was a belief Robin carried silently. That the time for emotional reckoning had passed. That revisiting old pain would only disturb what little stability remained. That love at this stage of life meant restraint. Robin believed silence was the kinder choice. In his later years, Robin wasn't haunted by regret. He was haunted by moderation, by the things he chose not to say, the questions he chose not to ask, the emotions he chose not to reopen, not because they were unimportant, but because they mattered too much. Robin's loneliness wasn't visible because it didn't look like loneliness. He wasn't abandoned. He wasn't forgotten. He was surrounded by people who loved him, people who believed he was at peace. And in many ways, he was. But peace, when built on unspoken truth, can feel isolating because it requires you to carry everything quietly. In the end, Robin Gibb didn't drift away from his family. He stayed close, physically, loyally, lovingly. But emotionally, he stepped back, not to punish, not to disappear, but to preserve what he feared might fracture if touched again. And that is the part of his story most people never saw, that the loneliest years of his life were not caused by loss alone, but by love, restraint, and a decision to remain gentle when honesty felt too heavy. Robin didn't leave behind a tragedy. He left behind a quiet truth, one that only becomes visible when the music stops.